Good afternoon, everyone. So last week we started looking at money market and money market instruments. Money market is the market for short-term debt securities. We know that the focus is maturity period is 1 year or less. That is what they are looking at. The characteristics of money market, main two characteristics are, one is it's the over-the-counter market, and the other is that it being a wholesale market. In a wholesale market, what we're talking about is large denominations are being traded. So we saw that money market instruments had some key features that set them apart from other market instruments. One major feature is, of course, the short-term nature. They had a maturity period of less than 1 year. The other important feature is because the maturity was very low or less than a year, these instruments were considered high liquid and they are of low risk. The low risk comes from two particular reasons. One is the issuers who issued these short-term money market instruments are commonly of a high credit rating. So, for example, you have central bank issuing treasury bills, commercial papers issued from highly rated companies. So, in that kind of a scenario, you can say the issuers' credit ratings help to reduce the instruments' risk in the market. And the other is the maturity time period. So if it's a shorter maturity, the funds were locked in for a very shorter period. So the maturity risk or the inflation risk or even the interest rate risk you can consider as very low. High liquid, why? Again, because it's a short-term instrument. You could quickly realize your instrument and quickly convert it into cash. Because of the high liquidity feature, the instruments were considered as a close substitute to money. You could see even in financial statements, treasury bills being considered to near cash equivalence investment. So that's why this market itself got the name money market. Okay. And another main feature is the discount pricing available in this instrument. Some instruments have an add-on interest rate. We saw that last week. But some instrument have this pricing called discount pricing, which is unique to the money market. We saw the purpose and the role of money market. The key purpose is to provide liquidity, to help manage risk, to enable central bank discharge their monetary policy and do their signaling work, to implement the signaling techniques. For those, money market was very, very important. On a company perspective or from a financial intermediary perspective, money market helped banks and companies raise their short-term funds that were needed for their working capital. For banks, it was for liquidity requirements. For those short-term requirements, money market was supporting these intermediaries. So we saw the participants in that. We studied that primary dealers were of two types. We have banks acting as primary dealers and standalone primary dealers who are companies dedicatedly acting as primary dealers. So they come into the market for two reasons. One is to manage their own short-term liquidity positions. Another is to act as a primary dealer on behalf of their customer. Okay. In terms of individuals as you and I coming into the money market, the applicability, the chance you could say is very less unless it's a high net worth individual. I will explain to you when we go to treasury bills. Mostly how they access money market is through the money market funds. We saw, for example, NDB and First Capital funds Through those funds, the companies pool money from individuals and invest in money market instruments. So we saw 7 money market instruments, and these 7, 6 out of 7 of them we categorized into 2 based on their pricing techniques. Commercial bank loans, certificate of deposit, repos were classified as add-on interest. Treasury bill, commercial papers, and bankers' acceptance went as discount pricing. And I wanted you to highlight certificate of deposit to be highlighted here. Why? Though initially it was issued as an add-on rate, later it also falls into the category of discount pricing. I'll explain it to you why that happens. Okay. Then we saw treasury bills in detail. We saw that this was the short-term instrument that was issued by the central bank on behalf of the government. You have 3 maturity buckets, 91, 182, and 364. If issued in the same currency, considered as the safest instrument in that currency. But if issued in a foreign currency, you cannot do that. You cannot consider it as default risk-free. Why? The government doesn't have the capability or the ability to print dollars. Only in 2 ways they can finance the maturity, either using their own dollar reserves or their own dollar cash inflows, or through refinancing by issuing a new dollar denominated instrument. So if either of them didn't work, there is of course a default risk for that instrument. We saw that treasury bill market, unlike the other instrument, had both primary and secondary markets. We saw that secondary market is a key feature that was only seen in capital markets. Why? Capital markets involved instruments of longer tenor to support the investments in longer tenors, and for people to realize or to liquidate their instrument before maturity, they had to have a secondary market. For that sense, capital markets were always supported by secondary markets. Money market, the requirement was not so much due to low maturity. But treasury bill market has an active and a liquid secondary market. How does the primary market work for the treasury bill? They are the issuer, central bank on behalf of the government, will issue the treasury bills to whom? Will you and I be available there in the auction? No. It's issued to the registered or the authorized primary dealers. It happens through a regularly scheduled auction process. And then subsequently, it hits the secondary market, where the primary dealers will now trade the treasury bills to the investors. I need to ask you a small question. Why? There were, even in your past papers, you would have seen there are questions targeting treasury bills on a practical aspect, where they've asked whether an individual investor like you and I could approach the treasury bill market. Can we invest in this treasury bill market? If so, how can we do that? Yes, of course, individual investors are allowed into the treasury bill market, again in 2 ways. One is to the primary market and one is to the secondary market. How can they approach the primary market? They approach the primary market through the primary dealer. They have to give their bid or give their order to the primary dealer. Primary dealer goes to the auction or is present. So in the regularly scheduled auction process, you will have the primary dealer being present. So the primary dealer will take up your order and place it. That's what happens in a primary market. In a secondary market, again, you and I as individual investors can approach the secondary market Here also, we don't have to act through a primary dealer, but we will transact or we will trade with the primary dealer. So you will buy or sell to the primary dealer in the secondary market. Okay. So you would have seen, irrespective of primary or secondary, for an individual investor, the access to the treasury bill market or the trade to the treasury bill market has to occur through a primary dealer. Okay. In the auction process, yes, they will take up your bid, but the bid has to go through them. Remember, in a treasury bill and in the treasury bond market, the minimum bid value is 5 million. Okay, so if you as an individual investor is capable to place a bid of 5 million rupees, sure, you could go ahead, put your bid in the auction, but not you directly, primary dealer on behalf of you. Okay, in the secondary market, nothing as such, you will directly trade with the primary dealer. So treasury bill have a active and a more liquid secondary market. One of the reasons is because it's a government security, so people prefer a treasury bill as because it's a very safe instrument. Again, we saw that there were two off the run and on the run issues. On the run issue is when a treasury bill have been issued recently. For example, if a treasury bill was issued this Wednesday, so it will be, I think, on the 20th, it was issued right now, or even be until the next Wednesday, it's considered as the on the run issue. Why? It is the most recently issued treasury bill. But if there's a treasury bill transacted in the secondary market that was issued before the most recently issued treasury bill, then it is called off the run issues. Okay. So we went through the formulas in detail as well. I told you to attempt the questions. We will go back to it today. Then we came across commercial papers. So what is the similarity between treasury bill and commercial papers? Both of them are short-term instrument. Both of them are debt instrument. Both of them follow a discount pricing method. Okay, both of them follow a discount pricing method. What are the differences between a commercial and a treasury bill? Treasury bill issued by the government. On behalf of the government, central bank will issue it. But commercial papers mostly issued by non-financial firms. Maturity levels of treasury bill 91, 182, 364 days. But commercial papers, the maturity usually falls for 6 months, but mainly not more than 90, not greater than 9 months. Probably between 3 to 9 is the preferred term. More practically, it usually is between 6 to 9. They don't go for a 3-month commercial paper. For that kind of a short term, they don't have need at the moment. Usually it's for 6 and 9 months, practically speaking. Okay. So in commercial papers, because it's a non-financial firm, do they give any security? Is it a secured instrument? No, it's an unsecured instrument. What is the sense of security that the investor gets? The issuer usually is a high credit worthy company with a high level credit rating by credit rating agencies. Therefore, that rating acts as a comfort to the investors. Commercial papers are much preferred than bank borrowings. You have 3 reasons for that. One, and the most important reason, is commercial papers can be issued at a lower interest than the bank. Okay, so a low cost funding, source of short-term funding for the issuer. Because of that, they prefer commercial papers. Other one is no need to provide any collateral. They can issue simply on an unsecured basis. And the third one is the time taken for the loan disbursement and the documentation involved in a bank borrowing is relatively higher than a commercial paper issue that they can do very much easily or very much quickly. Okay, so these are the three ways that the commercial paper looks attractive to a issuer than a bank borrowing as a source of financing. Okay, remember, commercial paper does not have a secondary market, and as I told before, this also goes on a discount pricing technique as the treasury bill. Therefore, the same formulas you use for treasury bills can be used here. Again, we'll go through the question after we finish off this series of slides. So last week when we stopped, we were at repurchase agreement. Just as the name suggests, it's an agreement to purchase a security back in the future. What happens is, today you enter into a transaction. Today what happens? Today I have a security. I come to you. I say, look here, I will sell you this security. Will you give me 10 million rupees? In 3 months' time, I will definitely come back and purchase my security from you. Okay, that's what happens today. So in 3 months' time, I come to you, I pay you back the money and take the instrument back. That's what happens in a repurchase agreement. Okay, so the instrument acts as the collateral here. Because it is the collateral, if you are the one who's purchasing from me, will you be willing to buy any instrument? No. You would want a safest instrument to be your collateral, right? Because if I default, you are going to sell this instrument and get your money back. So most of the time for repo transaction, or you can say 99% of the time, it happens based on government security. Treasury bills and bonds act as the collateral in a repurchase agreement. But if you compare the example I told you before, I took 10 million from you and in 3 months' time, I will pay you back the money. Can I pay you back just 10 million even after 3 months? No. I have to give you some kind of a compensation. What is that? I have to give you an additional interest. That rate you call as the repo rate. Okay. So considering that rate, when you compare between a treasury bill and a commercial paper, where does the yield of a repurchase agreement fall? A repo rate is definitely higher than the treasury bill rate, because treasury bill is default, risk free, everything. Here you are entering into a contract, you are giving a collateral, but there is a chance that you won't pay back. Okay, if you don't pay back, treasury bill is the way that the holder can get the money back. Okay, so therefore definitely the repo rate is higher than the treasury bill rate. Okay, but in comparison to a commercial paper, the rate is low. Why? Commercial paper is an unsecured money market instrument. So risk is high. Considering the risk, the yield rate, the return rate or the rate compensated has to be higher. But in repo, you are giving a collateral to your the person you are selling the instrument to. So there is some kind of a surety. Okay. So in terms of pricing, that's where the repurchase agreement falls. Will there be a secondary market for repurchase agreement? No. It's an agreement between you and I. You cannot sell this agreement to somebody else in the secondary market. So there is no any secondary market for repo. Now, remember, in a repo, the two transactions, one that happens today, one that happens in the future. What I do today, I sell it, the instrument today and get the money today itself. But in the future, the reverse of this will be happening. Today, I give you the security and I receive the money. But in the future, I will pay you the money and receive my security. So the repo is unwound. The word here is the unwound in the future when the investor purchases back when the dealer buys back the security from the investor. Okay. So this is what, on a graphical scale way, this is how a repo transaction will happen. So here in a repo transaction, you are looking from the point of view of the borrower. Which is important. Sorry. Okay. We are looking from the perspective of the borrower. Think it is me. Today, I will give you the government security and get the money. But in the future, I'm going to do the reverse of it. I'm going to pay you the money I got plus interest and get my security back. This is a repo transaction. Now the same thing, what if I say, what is the same transaction if you look from the perspective of the lender? Now I sell you, I give you the security. Okay. I sell with the agreement to repurchase. Now it's the reverse repo. You buy with the intention to resell in the future. So here we are talking in a reverse repo, we look from the point of view from the lender. A reverse repo transaction is an agreement where one party agrees to purchase a security. So today, when I enter into a repo transaction, I will sell it with the agreement to buy back in the future. What are you doing? You are purchasing from me, correct? And what are you agreeing? You are agreeing to sell it back to me in the future. So when I enter into a repo, you enter into a reverse repo transaction. Okay, where one party agrees to purchase a security from another with the agreement to resell it to them at a specified date and price in the future. Thus, a repo and a reverse repo can refer to the same transaction but from different perspective. In other words, when one party enters into a repo, so if I enter into a repo, what will I say? I enter into a repo transaction. That's what I will say. But what will you say? You will say, I entered into a reverse repo transaction. Okay? The amount the investor lends is always less than the market value of the security security of the government security given as collateral. Let's see why. I told you repo, connect it to a cashback loan. Think of it like a cashback loan. You have a fixed deposit in your bank and you tell your bank, look here, you keep my fixed deposit, give me a loan. I will settle the loan and collect my fixed deposit. Okay. So if I will definitely ask 100% of my FD value as the loan. But will you give me? You are the lender, right? I'm getting a loan from you. You're the bank. Will you as a bank give me 100% of the collateral? No. You will want to keep some amount from price changes, for interest, some portion to be kept aside. So the amount that you give me is definitely less than the entire FD amount. I think most banks follow this 90% rule. 90% of the fixed deposit value is how much they give out as loans. Just like that, if I am going to give a security, okay, I am giving a security to the lender which is worth 10 million. Today in the market, it's worth 10 million. Okay. Will the lender give me exactly 10 million? No. Lender will say, look here, this price, it's a treasury bill. Okay. So treasury bill, or it can be even treasury bond. There is an active secondary market. The price keeps actively changing. So today 10 million can be tomorrow 7 million. Can be day after tomorrow again 9 million. It can fluctuate. Okay. So the lender, when they are giving out cash funds, they will only give a percentage of it, or the cash funds that they give is always lesser than the market price of the collateral. The difference is called the haircut. It is to ensure that it still has sufficient collateral if the value of the securities fall before the primary dealer repurchases them. Before you repurchase, so in 3 months time before you repurchase, if the collateral value falls, you are at a disadvantage. You as a lender is at a disadvantage. So to protect yourself from that, you deduct or you keep aside a portion of the market value and then you lend it out. How do you know? If you take market value of the security, or let's say the treasury bill today, into 1 minus haircut. So usually a haircut of 10% is maintained. So if your market value is 100%, you can only fund it 90% of your market value. Okay. So in case, let's say it's a 10 million collateral and I have borrowed 9 million. Okay. And in the market tomorrow or day after, the price fluctuates and the value or the market value of my security comes to 8. Okay. From 10, it came to 8. I have given you 9.9. Sorry, 9 million. Okay. What happens practically? The primary dealer, the person who got into the repo transaction, person who sold the collateral initially has to give now more collateral. Listen to the example clearly. I give you a 10 million collateral and ask you, give me some money. You will keep a haircut for probable price decreases, for interest rate and all, for interest allocations, and you will only give me 90% of it. So 9 million. Okay. Now, if that 10 million market value comes to 8, that means market value of the security has now come down than the amount you have given me. Now you will say, look here, value has come down, you give me more security. And I am bound to give you more security in that scenario. Okay, because I have promised for that. That is the agreement. So I will give you more collateral to compensate. It is allowed to come down until the haircut percentage. For example, if you take this scenario out, initially you give 10 million. So haircut is 10%, meaning you can lend 90% of it. So you have given 9 million. If this value comes to 8 million, that is less than the 9 million, right? you have to replace. You have to replace with more security. Now 8 is not enough. You have to give another security which is having 2 million market value. Then only it will be valid. Okay. For you to protect yourself, because now you are at a dangerous situation. To prevent that is why you have this haircut involved. How do you calculate the haircut percentage? The market value of the security minus the amount you invested in the repo. That will tell you the haircut in haircut in amount terms, that divided by the market value of the security. How do you find the market value of the security? Now, usually, you know, this is the security that you offer is a treasury bill. So how do you know the market value? Last week we studied how to calculate the price of a treasury bill. So when you do this calculation, you will be able to arrive at the ongoing price of the treasury bill, which acts as the market value for your calculations. Okay. If the primary dealer defaults, what happens? So here usually repos are taken by primary dealers. That's why in several areas I have mentioned the same as primary dealer. Why? They are the ones who are authorized to deal in government securities, correct? So they go to the auction, they buy several treasury bill and bonds, and then they sell in the market. They have some for their own account as well. Okay, they are a dealer, no? So they purchase on their own name, and in the secondary market they sell off what they don't want to keep further. Okay. Now suddenly, if there is a liquidity requirement, there are primary dealer. All of a sudden, central bank is calling for another issue in a treasury bill, and I, as a primary dealer, don't have funds to invest in that issue. Then what do? I have only treasury bills and bonds. I don't want to sell them as well. It's a good interest rate, good coupon rate that I'm getting for. So a good discount that I'm getting for. Okay. What am I going to do? I will sell it to someone with the agreement to buy back in the future. So I will get into a repurchase agreement being a primary deal. If I default, the investor can sell my security in the market and realize the market value of the collateral. Okay. So usually investors, the one who I sell the instrument with the promise to buy back, the other counterparty I'm talking about, repo is a very profitable short-term investment for them. There are two reasons for that. Why? One is they get this repo rate, which is higher than a government security, but lesser than commercial paper. Now, higher than government security. Here, government security is your collateral, so you're much more protected, but again, you get a higher rate as well. Okay, so looking at that, it's more lucrative. Other one, what they do is, I sell the security to you with the agreement to buy back in the future. Okay, you now purchase it from me. You know, in the market, the market value of this treasury bill is going to decline. Okay, then what do? You quickly sell this instrument in the market. Okay, and the day you have to return it to me, you will buy from the market for a much lower price, much lower value, and provide it to me. So through that, the investor now gets a higher repo rate and a chance of a capital gains as well. So both the ways of earning are given in a repo. This is the benefit to the investor, the person who has lent the primary dealer money. Okay. Why is a primary dealer doing this repo transaction? One is it's very, very cheap for them. Cheap compared to what? Cheap compared to bank borrowings. If they go to a bank, it's a big transaction, big time consuming borrowing that they have to do. But here, on a cheap, much lower cost, providing the treasury bill as the security, they can get their funding. Okay. And the other benefit is they can get this funding and now buy more securities from the central bank as well. So they are able to expand their business without actually transferring the ownership of any government security. It's for a temporary arrangement. Okay. So they can make use of good market opportunities in the government securities market through this repo product. There are three ways the repos are structured. One is the overnight repo. Overnight repo, just as the name says, it's for one night. So today morning I invest, tomorrow morning it matures. It's just for one day that you arrange the funds. This provides the lowest return or lowest repo rate from the other types of repo. Why? Because maturity is only one day, you have to repay the very next day. But again, these also, you will have some kind of instrument or security involved, even though it's one day. Okay. Secondly, you have term repo. What is term repo? A bit more longer than overnight repo. Simple as that. Term repo is the repo agreement with maturity of more than one day. So it can span around from 3 to even 6 months. Okay. So till that time, the borrowing is available. You don't have to settle the very next day. Because the timing is longer, we know that repo rate definitely has to be higher than the overnight repo rate. Correct? Because you are giving the loan for a much longer time. Therefore, it carries a slightly higher rate. Thirdly, you have open repo. These open repos have no maturity. There is no agreement on a maturity date. So that doesn't mean it's something like an equity instrument. No, it is a debt instrument. On the day either of the counterparty calls it terminated, very next day you have to repay. Okay, but until then it is continuously revolved. Okay, so what happens is, think of overnight repo. Think of overnight repo. I enter today. So tomorrow morning I again renew. I enter into a continuous overnight repo throughout without cancelling ever. So what happens is, it's an open repo. There is no maturity date that I need to pay. Every day it is renewed. And when one of the party demands to be terminated, so the interest rate for that day is given as close to the overnight repo rate. Simply, it's an extension. Imagine overnight repo being continued daily without any end. Okay. Now again, in repurchase agreement, you have certain calculations to do. Mainly, it involves this: how to calculate the haircut percentage. How do you know the amount invested? How do you know the market price of the treasury bill? They can link it to treasury bill and question. Okay, so again, we'll go through this question at the end of the class. Next, you have certificate of deposit. Now, this is the fourth instrument, fourth money market instrument that is available. This is very less used in Sri Lanka. It's a bank product. It's a bank deposit product. and it is a product which has both add-on rate and discount pricing both involved. Let's see how that happens. Certificate of deposit is a deposit that has been made with a bank for a fixed period. So just like a fixed deposit, you have a fixed period for this transaction. Until then, you cannot, it's relatively blocked. You won't say you cannot take it up, nothing as such. It's on a fixed time period, at the end of which it will be repaid with interest. Okay. For this, they will give you a savings certificate, and the holder of that certificate is able to receive interest from this deposit. So it's a bearable certificate that you get. It's just a savings certificate. So if you show the certificate, bank is entitled or bound to pay you the interest because it's a bearer instrument. Okay. Short-term deposits are not usually issued by commercial banks and are non-negotiable. Okay. Where I told you, even on in Sri Lanka, very rarely you have commercial banks issuing this, but on a global scenario, generally these are accepted by the commercial banks. And the certificate of deposit, it has a maturity date, okay, and a fixed interest rate mentioned in that certificate, and it can be taken up for any amount of denomination. There is no any particular, or it's a very customizable limit. Certificate of deposit, you could similarly make it, think of it closer to time deposit. There's a restriction on the withdrawal of funds where they don't allow premature withdrawal, but doesn't mean that they never allow premature withdrawal. Even in a fixed deposit, they allow premature withdrawal, but on a penalty. Okay, it's on a penalty that you have to bear the cost of liquidity or bear the benefit of withdrawing. So let's see the important features of a certificate of deposit. One major feature is certificate of deposit is tradable. It can be exchanged between parties. Therefore, certificate of deposit has a secondary market. It's a tradable instrument. Okay. Then you have interest rate offered is lower than typical time deposit. So earlier we said, look here, certificate of deposit is very similar to time deposit. You can't uplift the money anytime you want. Yes, that's correct. But now you're saying that the rate received on a certificate of deposit is lesser than FD. How come? Even though I cannot uplift the money early, but I can trade my certificate in the market. Now that will allow for you to get some kind of a liquidity. Hence, the interest rate offered is lesser than the FD interest rate. Okay. As the certificate of deposit is made for a fixed period, investors can use funds earlier by selling the certificate to a third party at a price which will reflect the period to maturity and the current level of interest rate. Okay. So, without waiting till maturity, the holder or the depositor can sell the certificate to a third party in the market and realize the investment. To the issuing bank, to the bank who accepted the certificate of deposit, what's the benefit? Second one we already saw. Fourth one here we are seeing that the issuing bank is now able to collect funds or attract deposit at a very low cost than what they would have in a fixed deposit. Okay. Lastly, certificate of deposit offers a high interest premium above government securities to compensate for less liquidity and relatively high risk. Now, just as the all four features that we saw that there is a high level of risk involved. Even though tradable, there is no strong secondary market. Therefore, to compensate for this less liquidity and relatively high risk in this market, they could have demanded a higher interest premium over government security. Again, here you have certain calculations involved. Those are also relatively easier. What I want you to go do now is go to your earlier page. There we saw all the 4 types. Here I want you to highlight and write it that in the primary market, certificate of deposit. In the primary market, the certificate of deposit is issued on an add-on rate, very much similar to a fixed deposit. But after that, if it is getting traded in the market, then it becomes a discount rate. So in the primary market, it's add-on rate. In the secondary market, it's a discount rate. So again, using that, we'll attempt the calculations. Now we are looking at interbank loans and deposits. Now, interbank loans and deposit is also a money market, falls into the money market. Why? We know our banks, even though they are rivals and whatever competitive, still when there is a liquidity requirement within the banks, it is the bank that the banks come forward and help each other, not for free. They obviously charge interest on that, but that's how they interact and initially solve their liquidity problems. Okay, the very first choice of meeting a liquidity requirement of a bank is from the interbank market. From the interbank market, they try to fulfill their need. So loans extended from one bank to another is simply called the interbank loans. Okay, so why does an entity borrow? Now here, lender is also a bank, borrower is also a bank. Okay, so the lender might be having excess funds that day. The borrower might be out of funds. What could be a possible scenario is, for example, let's say I'm a bank, X bank. I have 10 billion deposit from a customer, and today all of a sudden he calls me and says, I need to prematurely uplift my 10 billion. Please give it to me. It's an emergency. Can I say, no, I can't pay like that, already contracted? You can't do that. On demand deposit, if it's a fixed deposit charging a penalty, but still you have to return the funds. Okay, so I myself as a bank is now stuck. Now today there's a 10 billion upliftment. Think of me as a small bank. Okay, tomorrow or in 2 days time, one of our borrowers who borrowed 10 billion is prematurely settling, or tomorrow and day after I will have some loan repayments which will all add up to 10 billion. Then I can match my shortfall. But today I am in a shortfall if I pay this 10 billion. Can I avoid it? It's an unavoidable situation. Then they approach the interbank market, borrow for 2 days to cover that short-term bridge. So they will borrow the 10 billion, pay for the deposit, allow the deposit to be uplifted. They might charge a prepayment penalty. But on the next 2 days, when I collect my funds, they will settle the lending bank. Okay, that's how the interbank loan and deposit work. Overnight loans are the short-term unsecured loan from bank to another. Okay. Now, usually most of the time the borrowing happens on an overnight basis. For one day you borrow. Now, when a bank borrows from another bank, do they give security? It's for a one day loan. Usually in the interbank market, it happens on an unsecured basis. I want you to highlight that. It happens on an unsecured basis. Remember, not even treasury bills or bonds are given as security. That only happens in repo and reverse repo, not here. Okay. And the borrowed funds are most of the time used to match any unforeseen maturity mismatch. Usually banks are very prudent in managing the maturity mismatches. If they have a shortfall, they will forecast that ahead and come up with financing strategies. So if there is any unforeseen maturity mismatch is where they will borrow from the interbank market. Or to meet the regulatory requirement, banks need to have a statutory reserve ratio. Currently, I think it's at 2%. So here you can see currently SRR is at 2%. So in case an entity, in case a bank is unable to keep that 2% as SRR, or the amount that they kept has a shortfall all of a sudden, remember the SRR depends on the rupee denominated loans and advances to be kept for liquidity purpose. Okay. So in case they don't have that, there is a shortfall in it. To fulfill that also, they would borrow from the market. Interest rate at which banks extend short-term loans to one another have assumed international importance. Why has it got international importance? Because it is the bank rate that you're willing to give on short-term and unsecured basis. So that rate is a very, very attractive rate, because your counter is another bank. You're giving it at a very lucrative price. You know that bank won't collapse. You know the bank will honor you, honor your borrowing. They will repay you back. Considering all those, the rate in which the banks transact in the interbank market represents an unsecured and a prime rate. It's for example, it's like the rate given for very good banks. Okay. So how it developed was that most of the companies who also eventually, especially non-financial companies, who eventually develop themselves or achieve the status of having a much better credit worthiness, very low credit risk, they started demanding the banks, look here, we are having a much more better risk profile than yours. Why don't you give it to us based on the core interbank interest rate? Okay. So that became like a basis in the financial market, and thus became a very internationally important benchmark rate. Okay. So what is the widely used benchmark rate? That is the interbank rate in which the banks transact. You should be knowing LIBOR. What is LIBOR? London Interbank Offer Rate. What is this? It is the average of rates charged by important banks in the UK for overnight loans for one another. So here the keywords are LIBOR has to be an average rate. It's not just one person. If HNB gave a loan to Bank of Ceylon, then just that alone won't compromise, won't be the interbank rate. They average. If HNB gives the Bank of Ceylon, People's Bank gives NTB, the average of all the rates charged, but between important banks. It has to be among the important banks that this transaction happens. Okay, that's another feature. Then the basis of the loan should be on a overnight basis. For one day, on an overnight loan lending basis, again on an unsecured term. There is no any security given. So if you can note it down as well, on an unsecured term. Okay, all these are the important features that led to this interbank rate to become of an international importance. Okay, so LIBOR, what happens is in UK the main banks, the average rate in which they give loans to each other on an overnight basis is collected, compiled, and published. It's put as publicized as LIBOR, London Interbank Offer Rate. LIBOR is given in 5 currencies. Most of the time we use London Interbank Offer Rate for dollar loans, for the dollar currency that they issue for the most of the international dollar loans. That's why the word term LIBOR we would have definitely heard. There's no way that you can avoid it. Another new upcoming interbank rate that's gaining international importance is the Euribor. Euribor is the Euro Interbank Offer Rate. What is the difference between LIBOR and Euribor? Here, its average rates, important banks, overnight basis, but important banks in the European region, Eurozone is what they are focusing on. So between such banks, the terms in which they lend. Now, if you are listening to news, you might get confused between these two terms, Euribor and Euro LIBOR. And so just now what we saw was Euribor. Okay. There's another benchmark rate called the Euro LIBOR. Are these the same? Are these the different? Obviously, these two are different. How? What is Euribor? Euribor is the rate in which the European banks lend to each other on an overnight basis. What is Euro LIBOR? It's the average rate in which important banks in the UK lend to each other on overnight basis, but for euro borrowings. Okay, I told you LIBOR gets calculated in 5 currencies. Okay, so dollar is one, so you have USD LIBOR, Euro LIBOR. So Euro LIBOR is what we're talking about here. If the lending happens in euro terms, then you use the euro LIBOR. Okay, so euro LIBOR is again rate in which the London banks are giving to each other, but the currency in which the loan goes is euro. Remember that. Now, this LIBOR, again, I want you to stress here is, if you had again been aware about what's happening in the global markets, there was a scandal relating to LIBOR where certain important banks manipulated LIBOR. Because of that, now they have come to a decision to cancel LIBOR. So this decision was taken up somewhere around last year. How are they going to, when are they going to stop it? They were initially planning to cancel LIBOR end of this year, 2021, December 31st. But now they have postponed it to 2023. So in another 2 years' time, they are going to completely cancel off. You must have heard last year there was a publication by central bank announcing that they are going to stop compiling and publicizing the SLIBOR. What is SLIBOR? It's the Sri Lankan Interbank Offered Rate. Okay. Why was central bank discontinuing it? One of the reasons was that on an international scale, LIBOR is being replaced. On a global trend, phasing out from the LIBOR. Phasing out meaning banks are now not basing their pricing based on LIBOR. They are moving out from LIBOR. Okay. So to be on a proactive scale, they also decided to discontinue the SLIBOR. And another reason that they are mentioning here is local market products, especially the local loan products by the domestic banks, hardly use this LIBOR rate. Okay, because there is not much usage of LIBOR, there was no point of central bank collecting the data, compiling it, and even publicly putting it out. Again, for that reason, they considered to stop it. What were the, so by when did they stop it? They stopped it by 30th June 2020. I don't know whether, if you go to the SLIBOR rate column to view it, you can't see the SLIBOR rate after December 30th, 2020. No records for, so unless you go here as, let's see whether it loads. Okay, so what were the counter rates or the counter bases that they promoted? They said, why don't you replace SLIBOR with the central bank policy rate? It can be average weighted call money rate, average weighted prime lending rate. Why don't you use your lending based on this SLIBOR? Now, who did they tell to switch these bases for? Not for the banks. Now, even on a local scale, if you have a customer who is a company, when you give them loans, you're going to give them loans based on the AWPLR. So their pricing depends on AWPLR plus a particular margin. Okay. So central bank was saying, if the benchmark rate in which your loan product is LIBOR, we are giving you 4 months time to replace SLIBOR by AWPLR, or it could be even any basis. It can be even policy rate or even the call money market rate. It could be even treasury bill rates, depending on your service provider, depending on your bank. Why don't you call them and adjust the basis? So that's why they gave an adequate timing for the markets to adjust for this issue. Why I'm highlighting this for you is, from this, I want you to know that LIBOR is cancelled. Definitely read up on that. And as to especially why LIBOR was cancelled. If LIBOR is cancelled, what are the possible consequences to the international banks? And what is the interest rate that is going to replace for LIBOR? Now here, when SLIBOR is cancelled, central bank is telling us, why don't you use these rates to replace it? But on international scale, LIBOR was the most prominent interest rate. Okay, so if we are cancelling that, what are we going to use instead? We are going to use SONIA, Sterling Overnight Interest Average, Index Average, if I'm correct. That's the rate that you will use to replace the LIBOR rate. It's called SONIA, Sterling Overnight, I think it's Index Average. Just have a Google on it. Now we are moving to euro currency instrument. Now so far we saw about all the instruments, even the banker's acceptance is there. But so far what we saw were usually in a domestic area. Treasury bill, commercial paper, certificate of deposit, and even repo and reverse repo. And then you have interbank loans. All of these could happen within Sri Lanka and so on. Now, euro currency instruments are international instruments that you issue to raise short-term deposits. Sorry, short-term funding. Okay. So, euro currency market. What are these euro currency market? They are the markets in which borrowing and lending happens in a currency of another country. Remember, we have an example here. If a corporate based in UK needs Japanese yen funding and they issue the yen denominated commercial paper in UK, what do you call that? You call that a euro currency money market instrument. Why are we calling euro currency? So many students, when they say euro currency instrument, they think the currency they use, the instrument is in euros, which is completely wrong. Why they use this term euro is that, remember, euro is a currency that was there for an entire union of countries. Okay, but each individual country had their separate currency. Okay, so if our country had a domestic currency, still because of the EU, we used euros. Okay, so it's not their domestic currency, they used another currency. Therefore, the term euro is used in this instrument as well. It doesn't mean that this instrument is issued in euros. No, that's completely wrong. This instrument is issued by an entity in a market, but it's denominated in a currency which is not the home currency of that country. If you are in UK and you want Japanese yen and your company is issuing commercial papers in yen, is yen the country's currency? No. Then this instrument is a euro currency instrument. So here you can see euro currency instrument is any instrument denominated in a currency which differs from that of the country in which it is traded. Now here, your geographical area in which you are collecting the funds is UK. That's where this commercial paper is going to be issued. But the denomination is happening in a different currency. It's like it's Japan instrument. Okay. Therefore, the term euro is utilized here. Now, what are the short-term currency instruments, euro currency instruments that they have? You have euro currency certificate, euro certificates of deposits. What is certificate of deposit? We just looked at it. These are transferable, tradable deposit that you keep with a bank for a fixed time, for a maturity. You can trade it in the secondary market. Now we are talking about a euro certificate of deposit. Therefore, when you are writing, now there is an additional component. It is a negotiable deposit which is traded with a fixed time to maturity, bearer instrument, and the currency of the certificate of deposit differs from the country in which it is traded. For example, Sri Lanka, let's say Sampath Bank, for example, totally hypothetical, okay? I approach Sampath Bank for a certificate of deposit, but I have Japanese yen with me, okay? So I deposit the Japanese yen and get the savings certificate for that. So that becomes a euro certificate of deposit. It's a euro currency short-term instrument. Why? Is Japanese yen our local currency? No. So simply the nature of the instrument says the currency differs. Interbank, interbank placement. We know interbank loans and advances again has to happen on a short-term overnight basis. Okay. But if that loan happens in a currency which is not the home currency, if let's say Sampath Bank is lending yen to HNB, is it the home currency? No. So it's an interbank loan and advances, but again from a currency that is differing from the country in which it is traded. Okay. Then you have time deposits. Time deposits, main feature as opposite to certificate of deposit, it is non-negotiable. You cannot transfer it. It's not a transferable document. The certificate is printed with a name on it. Okay. So it's a non-negotiable deposit, but just like certificate of deposit, it has a fixed time to maturity. But what about liquidity level of a time deposit in comparison to certificate of deposit? Liquidity level is very, very low. You cannot transact with someone else. You can't sell it to someone else. You have to wait till it matures. Okay. But in a certificate of deposit, liquidity level is relatively decent, relatively better than a time deposit. Why? You could always trade it, you could always exchange it, transfer the certificate to someone else and get your money back. Okay. Because of the low liquidity in the time deposit, they get a higher rate. The yield rate of a time deposit is higher than a certificate of deposit. So to an investor, to a depositor, time deposit is lucrative in terms of the yield rate. Euro is lucrative in terms of negotiability. But to a bank, what happens? To a bank, all are deposits, right? Why do banks accept deposits? It's their method of financing. So what do they prefer? They would prefer certificate of deposit, because as the bank, they can give a low interest to certificate of deposit. But for time deposit, they have to give high interest, because the funds are locked in for some time. For certificate of deposit also same scenario, it's locked in for some time, but because of the negotiability, bank can now source the financing from a lower cost. Doesn't work for time deposit. Okay. Now, in this scenario, if this time deposit is done in a currency which is not relevant or which is different from the country in which it is traded, it again becomes a euro currency or euro time deposit. Again, Sampat Bank, let's take HNB. I approach HNB and I place a fixed deposit, let's say in sterling pounds. I place a fixed deposit in sterling pounds with them. Is that the currency in which we trade in? No. Our country currency is rupees, but we are not using that here. It's on sterling pounds that we are using. Therefore, it becomes a euro currency instrument. You have call money. Call money is a very, what do I say, deposit which doesn't have a maturity per se. It can be called upon any time. That's why you say call money. Sometimes you have 7-day call deposit. For 7 days, you can block the funds. Again, these are non-negotiable. You cannot transfer it to somebody else. But these can be withdrawn from the bank at any time. There are fixed maturity, but you can immediately withdraw it on maturity. Okay, so that's why you call this the call money. Again, here, euro currency call money or euro call money occurs when the deposit made with a fixed maturity but with the ability to withdraw at any time. Then, ting, 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 it's a call money deposit. But the currency in which I'm placing the call money deposit is in, let's say, Canadian dollars. So, is Canadian dollar our home currency? No. Therefore, it becomes a euro currency instrument. Then you have euro commercial papers. What were commercial papers we discussed earlier? Unsecured instrument issued by non-financial firms, issued by private companies. But here, euro commercial papers. So, it's issued in a currency which is different from that of the current country in which it is traded. So, if X company, I am a company, I need some money and I'm issuing a commercial paper. But the commercial paper that I'm issuing is in commercial paper I'm issuing is in, let's say Canadian dollars again. But I'm located in India, in Sri Lanka. Everything happens in Sri Lanka. Or let's say, for example, I'm an Indian company based in India. Still, I raise my commercial paper in Canadian dollars. It becomes a euro commercial paper. Then you have something called euro notes. Euro notes are also unsecured debt instruments which are short term, very much similar to commercial papers. Okay, but the difference between commercial paper and a note is that, remember we studied that commercial papers are issued by high credit worthy, high rated in the companies. Notes are issued by companies which have a very poor credit rating, which are not widely acceptable or with a very low credit worthiness. That's why they carry the name called note. Okay. Now, even companies which don't have a good credit rating, still they will have the same needs, right? They will have some short-term funding requirement. So for them, when they can't go for commercial paper, so they don't have a good rating to go on a unsecured basis. Still, they can go on an unsecured basis using a note but they have to offer a very high interest rate, and because there is a high chance of your commercial paper issue not being subscribed, a euro note is always coupled with an underwriter. There is an underwriter involved in a note issue when it comes to the practical world. Because think logically, if I am an investor, there are two of you, one company which is highly, very well known, high level of credit rating, superb credit worthiness, and another company, they have a triple B minus, let's say, not well known in the market. No one, the past payment track is not well known by the others. So both of y'all are coming looking for short-term funding. I would prefer to go for the commercial paper. Even though unsecured, the inherent risk is low because the issuer is of a high credit worthiness. So even at a lower rate, I will consider commercial paper a safer, a relatively better instrument. But euro note is high risk. For that high risk, definitely I will expect a high pricing, high interest rate. Okay. And you as an issuer, you also not confident. I might say too much risk even for that level of interest rate. I don't want to buy. So many people can avoid the notes issued. So if they don't subscribe for it, they can't raise the funds. Remember. So when they go for a note issue, they always take an underwriter with them. Underwriter is involved in the transaction. If the notes issued is not subscribed by the depositors or by the investors, general public, what do? Then underwriters step in and agree to purchase the unsubscribed notes. Okay, that's what happens in a note. What happens in a euro currency note or a euro note? Here again, unsecured short-term debt instrument issued by not well known entities or not highly credit rated agent companies, but issued in a currency which differs from the country in which it trades. It becomes a euro note. Okay. Then finally, we come to bankers' acceptance. Now, I told you the first 5 of them were more of a domestic scale. Then we saw the 6th one on a very international way. On an international basis, what happens? Those are international based instruments. But what is bankers' acceptance? Bankers' acceptance is an instrument that is involved in international trade. Now, if you are doing international trade this time, when you learn LCs, you will definitely get a good idea of this. Okay. Bankers' acceptance is an order to pay a specified amount to the bearer on a given date if specified conditions have been met, usually delivery of promised goods. Now let's see how we could okay. So what happens is, about letters of credit, right? So let me start from that itself then. You have an importer. Okay. First, what does that importer do? The importer will place order for the goods with the exporter. Okay, that's what will happen first. And then the exporter will say, fine, you send me the LC. I need the letter of credit. So the importer will approach his bank and say, on behalf of me, please open a letter of credit. Okay. So letter of credit is issued in favor of the exporter. For this letter of credit, fees will be paid by the importer from the importer to the importer's bank. Okay. Now what happens? Now exporter has the LC and the order as well. So LC is a commitment. So, and they are more comfortable when it's a LC payment. So there he will start manufacturing his goods and will ship his goods to be sent to Sri Lanka. And then will take the documents needed. And now what happens? He will ship the goods to the importer, correct? And will send the documents to the importer's bank. Okay. He will send the importer documents to the importer's bank. Now, there can be two ways in which the payment can happen. If it's a site LC, okay, site LC, then immediate payment has to be done. Immediately immediately the importer has to pay the importer's bank. Or on a practical sense, what happens is importer's bank will immediately pay the exporter. Okay, just as the document is presented, but let's say you call it site LC, just as the documents are cited, you have to make the payment. Other one is on a usance basis, on a delayed basis. There what happens is the exporter will give some credit time for the importer. Fine, you take 2 months, clear this good, sell it, and then you pay it to me. Okay, some credit period. Now to the exporter, what if this importer doesn't pay me back? There is a high chance, right? He might not pay me back. So he will give a credit period, but he will ask the importer, look here, tell your bank to give me a acceptance or generate a draft in which you will promise to pay and get it accepted by the bank. Moment the bank places the acceptance, the bank will become liable for the payment. So the exporter is very, very happy. It's confirmed. Payment is guaranteed. So that's how the banker's acceptance came about. Okay. So when using the banker's acceptance, the exporter, now let's say he has given 2 months credit, he doesn't have to wait for the 2 months. He can transfer the banker's acceptance to someone else and get the money upfront. So he could trade this instrument as well. Banker's acceptance act like a post-dated check. With the bank guaranteeing the payment. So let's see here, banker's acceptance is an order to pay a specified amount to the bearer on a given day. If specified conditions have been met, usually delivery of goods. So when the goods have been delivered, they will give an order, say immediately pay the exporter this amount. That's what you call as banker's acceptance. Why do you treat it like a post-dated check? Something in the future needed to happen. Now here, delivery of goods. If the delivery of good happens, then the payment will be done. That's why they equate it or consider it similar to a post-dated check. Okay. Bankers issue the acceptance where they agree to pay if the importer fails on a specified date. Exporter can sell this at a discount if he needs immediate cash in the secondary market. Ultimate bearer will receive the face value of the acceptance at maturity. So that is after that at the end of 2 months. Acceptance usually have a maturity of less than 6 months. Okay, that's why they come into the money market instrument list. Why? The usual maturity is not less than, is less than 6 months. And see how this product is. There is a secondary market for this product. So remember last week we started marking over here. So here you can say what is discount and what is add-on. Treasury bill had secondary market. Certificate of deposit had a secondary market. Bankers acceptance have a secondary market. So what are the instruments which had discount rate or discount pricing and secondary market? Treasury bill and bankers acceptance. So those are possible areas in which you can get MCQs in. So jot those down. It's easy when you study. Okay. So this bankers acceptance, let's compare and contrast with commercial paper. How can this be different, or in what ways can it be different from a commercial paper? Now, bankers acceptance is almost always related to a delivery of good, or there's a good exchange of some sort. Okay, so acceptance is tied to the sale or delivery of some specific goods, and there will be a export order and some proceeds are going to come. So in that kind of arrangement is where you have bankers acceptance involved. But in commercial papers, there's nothing as that. Here, in commercial papers, just for a short-term funding requirement, you simply raise the money. But for bankers acceptance, there need to be a sale or delivery of goods, or in other words, there need to be a valid transaction supporting it. Okay. And the other difference is that the bearer who gets the acceptance or gets this instrument, on whose confirmation do they consider as most important? Are they going to depend on the issuer of this instrument, the bank, or the transacting company? Bankers' acceptance, the strength comes from the guaranteeing bank. The bank will say, look here, in 2 months' time, if this one doesn't pay, I will pay you. That is the acceptance. Okay. So the investor or the bearer of that instrument relies on the bank's guarantee, bank's acceptance. But in a commercial paper, nothing as such. They depend on the strength of the issuing company. Remember, commercial paper issued by non-financial entities. So their investors rely on the strength of the issuing company as their security. Okay. So in these two ways, bankers' acceptance will be different from commercial papers. Now we'll move to the calculations. I hope you did the questions. I will run through the answers with you. and I want you to see certain relationship between these variables. The very first, we have the treasury bill question. Suppose you buy a 360-day treasury bill at the price of 95, face value 100. What is the discount rate? Just by looking at the question, you can say discount amount, is 5 rupees. Why? Face value 100, you bought it at a price of 95. Okay, so discount in amount terms is rupees 5. But what is the discount rate? We know discount rate is discount divided by the face value. Face value is the importance here. So we have already calculated the discount, which is 5 rupees. And what is the face value? It's 100. Will that be enough? No. Now you have to annualize it. I told you for a discount purpose, we use 360. Okay. And how much are the days left until maturity as per the question? You have 360 days left for maturity. So simply 5 divided by 100 multiply into 360 over 360 will get you the interest rate or discount rate at 5%. Okay. What is the holding period yield? What is a holding period yield? It is the return or the yield that you get when you hold the funds for that particular for the period that you hold. How much is the return? Okay, so that is a unannualized rate of return. How do you calculate that? Simply, now it's a or. It's a, remember the word here, it's or. Either you use this formula or either you use this. So we can use this. We know discount is 5 rupees, but now are we using 100, which is face value? No. When you talk about yield, that's your return. You talk about return in comparison to the amount you invested. So the amount you invested is the amount you bought, the price in which you bought. So purchase price is at 95. So simply 5 divided by 95 will get you a holding period yield of 5.26. We just multiplied by 100 to convert it into a percentage. Okay. Calculate the yield of the security. Now we are going to annualize this and see the return for a year. How do you do that? There are 3 ways. Simply, you can take discount in terms of amount 5 divided by 95. That will get you your holding period yield. Now you are going to multiply by, it's a treasury bill, so you have to use 364 divided by days to maturity, which will be how long? 360. So based on that, you will end up at 5.32 as your annual yield or the yield from the security. Now we are going to the second question. Suppose you buy a 182-day treasury bill at a price of 95 with a face value of 100. How do you calculate the discount rate? Now, discount in terms of amount, does it differ? No. It's again 5 rupees. But now we have to calculate the discount rate. You have to annualize it. When you're annualizing it, 5 divided by 100, which is the face value, multiplied by, always numerator for a discount rate is 360. That has no change. but you divide it by days left for maturity. Here, we assume that there is 182 days left until maturity. So, divided by 182, you will get 9.89, okay, as the discount rate. Then we go to the holding period yield. That is simply discount divided by purchase price. Purchase price 95, discount 5. So 5.26 will remain as your holding period yield. Okay. How much will be my yield from the security? So here I'm talking about an annualized yield. So I will have 5 divided by 95 into 364. Why? Because still it's a treasury bill. It's not a commercial paper. So 364 divided by days left to maturity, which is 182. That will give me a yield of 10.53. Now what I want you to understand here is, do you see that the discount rate is always lower than the yield? Why is that? The reason behind that is the discount rate, your basis of calculating the discount rate is face value, which is a high denominator. But annual yield, you're talking about price. Because this is a treasury bill which is issued at a discount, the price is always lesser than the face value. Okay. So when the price is lesser than face value, always the annual yield will end up higher than the discount rate. You can see that here as well. Why we say holding period yield is not a good measure to calculate your return, you can see from here. Now, irrespective of the scenario, holding period yield is the same. There is no change in that. Can you see? It's at 5.26 here. Same thing here. But when you really look at it, see the circumstance of this case and circumstance of this case. Yes, in both scenario, you receive 5 rupees as your discount. Okay. But to earn that 5 rupees in question number 1, you have to wait for 1 year. But in question number 2, you only have to wait for 182 days, just 6 months, and you will get your 5 rupees. So, a holding period yield doesn't actually reflect or give you any proper communication. If you look at the holding period yield, you will say there is no, it's indifferent. I can choose between these two. There is no clear choice. But when I calculate annual yield, I know see annual yield of question number 2 is 10%. It's a 10% yielding instrument. Whereas question number 1 is only gets me 5%. Okay. Therefore, best decision maker would go for the treasury bill which is there in the question number 2. Okay. Now, why there are zeros here is, you could see, here what I have done here is I have used the elongated formula as well to calculate. Here it should be 364. Here what I have done is I have converted the holding period yield into the annual yield. Just multiply 5.26 into 364 divided by 360. Got me the answer, or I can directly work out as well. Same thing is over here. Okay. Then we go to question number 3. Find the purchase price of a 91-day treasury bill with a face value of 100. So let's jot down the information in the question. Face value 100, 91-day treasury bill with a face value of 100, that's given, which has a discount rate of 2.9761. Okay, given. Holding period yield of 0.75. Yield of 3.03. Here also see, even in the example, yield rate is higher than the discount rate. Okay. Now, how are we going to arrive at the price? We know the face value 100. By simply minusing the discount, you should be able to get the price of the instrument. Okay, simple as that. But now you only have the discount rate. You have to convert this discount rate to match it to the instrument. Why am I asking you to convert it? Because this discount rate is now annualized. You calculate it for 360 days, correct? So what do? This 2.97 is a 360-day rate. I will now have to find what is the discount rate for 1 day. What is the discount rate for 1 day? 2.9761 divided by 360 will get me the 1 day interest. Okay. But how many days to maturity is this instrument? 91. So if I multiply and see the 91-day discount, it is at 75%. So if I take 0.75%, so if I take 0.75% of 100, which is the discount, and deduct that from 100, I will get my pricing. Okay. Same thing I'm going to do here. Holding period yield. Now holding period yield, have I annualized it? No, it's not converted. It's as it is. So do I have to change anything? No. This is the yield that I will get when you hold that instrument till maturity. Okay. So 1 plus holding period yield will be equal to 100. Let me again explain it to you. Now we know the face value, right? Face value is the total return that you will get on maturity. Am I correct? It's a zero coupon bond. You only get the discount. So on maturity, investment plus the discount, totally you will get your face value. Okay. Now, as per the question, your holding period yield is 0.76. Good. Which means you invested, if you invested 100 rupees, you're going to get 0.76 as your incremental return. Now, 100, which is your investment, plus your yield of 0.76. You know, face value equals price plus discount. Okay. Okay. So here I am saying, what if my price is 100% and my discount, or discount, I mean, I can't use the discount rate, it's my yield, right? My return. My return holding period yield is 0.076. Then the total face value should be equal to 100.76%. Okay. So if 100 rupees is equal to 100.76, how much is 100? Okay, if 100.76 percentage is equal to 100 rupees. How much is this 100%? So I simply divide the face value by 100.76 and get the 100, what is the entire price value. That's how the thinking works. The third method, using the yield rate. Now you have the face value 100. Now this yield rate is an annualized yield rate, correct? For a year. Now I need to find the yield rate for 1 day. What am I going to do? How do I find the yield rate for 1 day? Annualized yield divided by 364 will get me the 1 day annual yield. Okay. 1 day annual yield is 0.0083. It's not the holding period yield. 1 day annual yield. Now I need to know what is the yield if it's for 91 days. What is the yield when it's 91 days? If I multiply this by 91, I should end up with the holding period yield. Why? I'm holding the instrument for 91 days only. So there you can see it's approximately close to the holding period yield over here. Okay. And then what do I do? The same method as what we did here. 100 plus the holding period, 100% plus holding period yield. You equate it to 100 rupee, which is face value. Deduct 100 by 100.76% and you get your price as 99.25%. Okay. Now throughout this calculation, I showed you there is a gap between discount rate and the discount rate and the annual yield. You can see discount rate is always lower than the is lesser than the annual yield. Blue is the annual yield, red is the discount rate. That is one. Other one is when the price of the instrument keeps increasing, can you see the yield rate is declining? So there is an inverse relationship that we see here. If the price increases, so on 95 rupees, my yield rate was 5.32%. Excellent. Let's increase the price to 99. My price will become, my yield rate will become 1.1%. If I reduce the price to 80, yield rate is 25%. So can you see when the price is increasing, the annual yield is declining. There's an inverse relationship that we can see. So you have to note that down as well. Next one, we have the commercial papers. A 30-day commercial paper with a 10 million face value has a discount rate of 4.75%. What is the price of this commercial paper? So they've given the discount rate, asking you to calculate the price. Face value 100, discount rate is 4.75, days to maturity 30. So just as treasury bills, we know this discount rate is annualized. Okay. So what do I do? Simply divide it by, can I divide by 365? No, discount rate always involves 360. So divide by 360. What am I getting? I will get the 1 day discount rate. Good. Excellent. Now this instrument is for 30 days. So what is my 30-day discount rate? I will multiply the 1 day discount rate by the days to maturity. So for 30 days, this will be my discount rate. So what is the 30-day discount as a percentage? Face value divided by this 30-day discount percentage will get me 39,583. So my price will be 9,960,416.7. Okay. So simply you could reuse the formula and calculate, or on from a thinking perspective, you can use this. Investor has purchased a 30-day commercial paper with a face value of 1 million for a price of 990. What is the discount rate for this? Simple, get the discount, divide by the face value, multiply by 360, divide by 30. So you will get your discount rate. Price of a 182-day commercial paper is 4,925,000. If the discount rate is 2.9671, what will the commercial paper pay at the day of maturity? Now here it's a very tricky question. Commercial papers, we know, always mature to the face value, correct? So this question they're telling you to find the face value. So I have given you the formula to calculate the face value, or you could simply take your discount formula and do a reverse calculation. You should be able to get your answer as 5 million. Okay. The face value of 182-day commercial paper is 8 million. If the investor wants to earn a return of 4.0928%, what is the price he will be willing to pay? So here the return is the annual yield they're talking about. So I have to calculate the price of the asset using the yield formula. So here, this is the annual yield. I will simply divide this yield by 365 now. Remember, I can't use 364. It's commercial papers here. So 365 will be the rate I'm using. And then I will have to multiply it by 182. 100% plus this. Face value divided by this particular amount will get me my price. See, that's how the thinking works. Again, here I want you to understand, if the, now see in the earlier scenario, earlier when the yield rate increases, see from 4, if it increases, let's say to 22, price declines. If the yield rate falls, price increases. So understand the inverse relationship. Next week, we'll be starting capital market. So before we start off, we'll finish up the repo question. It's not much. Repo and just one question on certificate of deposit, and we'll start off capital markets. Okay. Thank you so much for listening. We'll again meet next week.